Hello, OpenXML developers. This is the second screencast in this series on the Identity Manager internals. Now we are looking at the Identity Manager itself. And a couple of things that we'll see. First of all, up at the top here is the definition of the class Identity Manager settings, and it's also has the custom XML XName and the content item type XML value and operation type XML value, those classes. Here is the main method in the Identity Manager class is this process identities method here that takes the open word processing document and the Identity Manager settings. A couple of things that it does here. It sets up a couple of dictionaries here so that it's easier for the Identity Manager code to access all of this stuff. We'll see cases of that further on. I'm not going to refer to it. It's easy enough stuff there. I'm going to do one thing, which is I'm going to talk at a meta level just for a minute. If we go down to the bottom of the Identity Manager module, there is this public static class extensions. And this is a whole collection of extension methods that makes it easier to work with field codes and the content items in an entire document. So this effectively is the API that the rest of the Identity Manager code uses. So you can think of it that we have a document, and this document has any number of field codes, and then each field code has any number of content items. So there are lots of different ways that we're going to want to look at all of these field codes and content items. So for instance, here, this first extension method here takes an open word processing document and returns the complete selection of field codes for the entire document. One quick point, before we could call list field codes, in each one of the various methods that performs operations on this open document, the first thing that happens in each one of these is it calls this method Annotate Paragraphs. And Annotate Paragraphs goes into every paragraph in the document, removes all existing annotations, and then re-annotates that paragraph with the field code and content item information. And what this enables is we can go into one of these methods, remove superfluous row and cell content IDs. We can do all kinds of operations. We can remove field codes, we can move content items from one field code to another, and so on. And when we're done, we can simply return, and in the next operation, it will go through and remove all of the annotations and re-annotate everything. So any changes that we have made to the various field codes and content items then are reflected in the annotations, again, after we call Annotate Paragraphs. This just simplifies the code. If we were trying to keep all of those annotations in sync every time we were in removing field codes, adding content items, moving a content item from one place to another, this would add a whole bunch of points of possible failure to this. Those annotations could get out of sync with what was actually in the document. And that's bad. If we had that, that would lead to very strange bugs. So therefore, at the beginning of every one of these operations to do some particular resolution of ID of content items and some particular resolution effectively of the field codes of those content items, the first thing we do is called Annotate Paragraphs, and then we have a clean set of annotations to work with. So there are various extension methods that make things easier to work with. For instance, this method here gets the set of field codes for a particular paragraph. And here, this first field code gets the first field code for a particular paragraph. This list of lists This extension method doesn't actually have anything to do with field codes per se. What it does is it goes through every paragraph in the document and gets a list of every numbered and bulleted list in the document. And that's based on this list key, which is a string that consists of the abstract number ID followed by the ancestor ordinals. You can take a look at those other screencasts if you're unclear of what the ancestor ordinals are, the other screencasts that introduce the Identity Manager. This extension method list item paragraphs, this returns a list of all the paragraphs that actually are part of a bulleted or numbered list. So that's what this does. It gives you just those paragraphs that we're interested in if we're working just with lists and list items. This is an interesting one, this content items, is this takes a collection of paragraphs and returns all of the content items for that entire collection of paragraphs. And we use this when we're, for instance, looking for a particular content item in a collection of paragraphs. So we might have a collection of the paragraphs for a row in a table, and we want to find the content item that actually denotes the entire row. And it might be in the first paragraph of the row, but in many cases it may not any longer be in the first paragraph of the row, but we're looking for it wherever it might be inside that row. Let's see. Here, this is just an extension method to get every paragraph in the document. This is similar to the content items. It's an extension method to get all of the field codes for every paragraph in the document. Just like we had this extension method to get all of the content items for a collection of paragraphs, here we have an extension method to get all of the field codes for a collection of paragraphs. And here is one to get all of the content items just for a particular paragraph. This next field code ID, this is a method that we call when we need to add a new field code to the document. So we need to know what the next field code ID we should be using. So this is based on the next field code ID from the custom XML part. This list item info, one thing is that as part of annotating all of the paragraphs in the document, that function calls retrieve list item for every paragraph in the document, and that ends up annotating every one of those list items with this list item retriever.list item info. And we're going to use that in various cases. First of all, that is an easy way to get at the abstract num ID for that particular list item. And also it tells us the level of that particular list item. There's lots of good information in that. We need that information when we start working with the field codes and those content items. This descendant paragraphs trimmed. This is actually an important thing that we need to do because let's say that we want to get a collection of all of the paragraphs for a row in a table. Well, there's one thing is that row in the table, that row itself may contain an embedded table, and we don't want to get all of the paragraphs for that embedded table. Further, that row can potentially, theoretically, contain a text box. Any paragraph can contain a text box. The way text boxes are created in OpenXML, they're kind of out of sequence of any other content, and we don't want to get those paragraphs that are part of that text box. When we're looking at just the paragraphs for a row, we only want to see the paragraphs for the row, not for the paragraphs that are in any embedded table or for in any embedded text box. Those things are handled by the recursive nature of all of this. It's just that getting the trimmed versions of these descendants helps us to exactly process the content that we want to process. If you have more questions about what getting a trimmed version of the descendants is all about, then take a look at this MSDN article called Mastering Text in Open XML Word Processing ML Documents. This discusses the need to process trimmed elements in depth. This extension method that returns an X document for the custom XML part, it calls that retrieve custom XML part lambda expression, passing in the open word processing ML document, and then it calls .getXDocument. This gets used at various places to get the XML for the custom XML part that we're interested in. Okay, we've talked about all of these extension methods. So to reiterate, we've got an entire document. This document has any number of paragraphs in it. Any paragraph has any number of field codes in it. Most often, every paragraph will have only one field code. Sometimes, though, paragraphs will have no field codes in them if the paragraph was inserted by the end user in the editing process, and other times the paragraph will have multiple field codes in it if the end user deleted paragraph marks in that document. And then every field code has any number of content items. Often, it will only have a single content item, which is the paragraph content item, but it certainly can have a table content item, a row content item, a cell content item, and a paragraph content item. And if that paragraph in the table is the first paragraph of a list, of a numbered list, then that one paragraph can certainly have 6 content items. It can have content item of table, row, cell, paragraph, list, and list item. One paragraph can have all 6 content items as part of it. But most often you'll find most paragraphs have only a single content item unless they're part of a table or if they're part of a numbered list or bulleted list. There are effectively axis methods where we say, I want to get a list of all the paragraphs for a table, or I want to get a list of all the paragraphs for a row, and then given that list of paragraphs for a row, I want to get a list of all the field codes for that row, or I want to get a list of all the content items for that row. And you'll notice that they kind of all fit together like hand in glove, that if you have a row element, you can get the paragraphs trimmed, and then you can immediately dot into getting all of the field codes for those paragraphs in the row, or you could dot into getting all of the content items for that list of paragraphs for the row. It all makes for pretty compact code up above. So now we're going to talk about the Identity Manager proper. So we've got this process identities method, and first thing we do is we just do a little bit of house cleaning to create some dictionaries to make it easier to get at some of those values. Next of all, we check for disallowed content. With this distribution of Identity Manager, there are a number of different varieties of content that are not allowed. For instance, we don't allow for content controls, and we don't allow for ActiveX controls, and we don't allow for math formulas and so on. There are limitations to this particular version of the Identity Manager. If you need to have any of these limitations removed, then feel free to contact me. You can contact me as always at eric@ericwhite.com. I'm always happy to receive emails from OpenXML developers. After checking for disallowed content, it does a little bit of cleanup and normalization of markup. One of the points that we use in this is that the Identity Manager, it tries to always do something called do no harm to the document. So in each one of these operations, it does a little operation to process things that it knows that it can process and not create a document that is invalid and not create a document where content item identities have been miscorrectly resolved. So that might be a little bit abstract at this point in time, but the key point is we're going to go and we're going to take little baby steps through this process of processing revision tracking, processing these field codes, to reestablish identity for every content item in the document. And therefore, because we are reestablishing identity, we can reestablish metadata for all of these content items. So let's look at cleanup and normalize markup. And this does one thing. It removes all of the RSID info and removes bookmarks. That's just a good thing. That made it easier for me to work with the Identity Manager when I'm doing things and looking at markup. Those RSID things, they just get in the way a little bit, and the bookmarks are really irrelevant to the whole point of the Identity Manager. Another thing that it does is accept unnecessary revisions. So accept unnecessary revisions. These are accepting the revisions that are not necessary for processing by the Identity Manager. And what this means is we accept revisions for header parts, footer parts, endnotes parts, and footnote parts. That's what this does. Another thing that it does is it removes non-comment field codes. Currently, at this point in time, this is not implemented. It needs to be implemented. We'll get to that as appropriate. And then that's all that this cleanup and normalize markup does. And then finally, we get down to process identities internal. And this is what's going to do the actual work. And what we can see here in process identities internal is it runs through here and it takes a number of different actions on the document, and you'll find that things are divided up into two categories. First are the actions that we take before accepting tracked revisions, and then we get down to this point and we call revision acceptor.accept revisions for the main document part, and then following that, there are various operations that we have to take after accepting tracked revisions. So certain of the operations are needed to be done before accepting tracked revisions, certain are needed to be done after accepting tracked revisions. And also, again, as we're going to see in this, each operation we're going to try to do no harm to the document. We're going to try to take little teeny actions and just do the right thing. So let's take a look at what the first one is. We have remove duplicate insertions with an insert and delete. So there's two different cases. There's remove duplicate insertions, insert, delete, and there's remove duplicate insertions, move from, move to. So what this is let's say that the user goes into a document and they do Control X and then they do Control V elsewhere in the document. So now we have one deletion and one insertion. And then let's say that they do Control V, Control V. So what that means is we've got field code 2, say, is deleted, and then we have field code 2 is inserted, and then we'll find field code 2 is inserted again, and field code 2 is inserted again. And what this means is we can take that deleted one, that's okay, we can leave the inserted one as it is, but we find all subsequent insertions in that particular scenario and just remove those field codes. And when we remove those field codes, then later on we'll go through the document and we'll notice that there are those paragraphs that don't have field codes, and therefore at that point in time, field codes will be inserted into the document, denoting that those content items have been inserted. So what we'll see here is this follows a pattern that we'll see often. First thing that we do is we annotate all paragraphs. And then the next thing is it creates this dictionary, and this dictionary is all of the field codes where the field code status is equal to field code status of delete, and it to dictionaries it with a value of 0 in the dictionary. And you'll notice here we are taking the open document and I'm dotting into that extension method .fieldcodes, and that does all that work down below where it goes through every paragraph. It gets every field code for each one of those paragraphs and returns a collection of all of those field codes. And when we get all of those field codes, they've been annotated through this Annotate Paragraphs method. it will have appropriately set this field code edit status to delete if those were deleted. So we're getting a list of every deleted field code in the document. We also then get a list of all the inserted field codes in the document. Then we iterate through every inserted field code in the document. We get the ID of that field code. And if the deleted dictionary contains that key, then we increment the value. If the value is greater than 0, then we know that we can delete the field code. So in other words, when we first get it, the value is 0, so we don't delete that. So the first one, we find a inserted field code, we find its deleted field code. The first time we don't do anything, and we just increment the current value and put that back into the dictionary. The next time around, we come in and we see that, okay, we've already seen a deletion and an insertion, so the next inserted item gets removed. And this is where we get to use that markup elements and just dot into dot remove. And with this one little action, we deleted that field code from that extraneously inserted paragraph. So if we go delete, insert, insert, that second insert will have its field code removed by this method. I'm going to walk through in detail a couple of these in that same fashion, and then I'm going to start speeding up because all of these start following a very similar pattern. So remove, duplicate, insertions, move from, move to. We look at this one. It's almost identical in nature to the other one where we get the move from list and we get the inserted ones, and then we go through each inserted one. Now, one thing you can know is if something is moved from, by definition, there is a move to. So this takes advantage of that, saying that if we have a move from and we have an inserted field code that is in the move from, then we know that we can remove it because there is a move to. So this remove duplicate insertions, move from, move to, that goes through and takes care of the situation where we have delete a paragraph, insert a paragraph, and Word automatically converts those to move from, move to, and then it gets inserted again. That second insertion should have its field code deleted so that later on in the processing will denote that that paragraph is a newly inserted paragraph or newly inserted content item. Next, we're going to want to process tables with a deleted content ID. So we can find tables where the first row of the table has been deleted, but there are rows further on that have not been deleted. So what we want to do is we want to find the table content item and move it from there into a content item that is no longer deleted. So let's take a look at that code. First thing we do is we get a list of every table in the document. Then we get a list of all tables with deleted content ID, but not fully deleted. And if you look at this, it's not that complicated of code, but it's a little bit of hairy code. First of all, we get the first cell, and once we have the first cell, we get all of its descendants paragraphs trimmed. So this, in most cases, is the list of all just the paragraphs in that cell, but if there were an embedded table in that cell, then we need to appropriately process based on trimming the descendants. We then get all the field codes for that list of paragraphs for that first cell, and then we get the table content item. Once we have the table content item, we can look at the field code. So here's the first cell field code information. First cell FCI is first cell field code information. And we look for those field codes that are deleted or moved from. And if they are deleted or moved from, then we go in and we get the list of deleted rows. And we basically determine whether the entire list of deleted rows is equal to the entire number of rows. If the entire table is deleted, then we don't care. The table's deleted. We're going to let the revision acceptor remove that table, and we're done with it. But if that table is only partially deleted, then we want to be moving that table content item from the deleted paragraph and that deleted row into a paragraph where it's not deleted. That's all this does. This whole thing here gets a list of all the tables that are not fully deleted, but where the table content item is in a field code that is deleted. And then we iterate through all of those, and we find the first non-deleted row in that table. And once we found that first non-deleted row, then we find the descendants paragraphs where those field codes are not deleted and they're not moved from. Once we've found that one, we have the first non-deleted paragraph, and here we find the row content item for that non-deleted row. We get the first cell in that row. In effect, what we do here is we make a new field code for the custom XML part here. And this field code for the custom XML part, it has the field code name from the settings. It has the ID. We give it a new ID. We also we put in that table content item. We put that in there, and we put the row content item in there. We remove the table content item from that previous place where it actually was deleted, and we add this new field code for the custom XML into the custom XML part. We can have the situation where when we find the first non-deleted row and we find the first cell in that non-deleted row and all of the paragraphs in that non-deleted row in that first cell have been deleted. Now, what you'll find is in that situation is that you can't delete every paragraph in a cell. Word won't let you do that. Word requires that every cell have a single paragraph in it. However, all of the field codes in that cell would have been deleted. If the user selected everything in that cell and deleted it, then all of the field codes would be deleted. So if we get to the situation where the first non-deleted paragraph is equal to null, we are in that situation. The last paragraph in the first cell, we find it, and then the next thing that we do is we get the next field code, and then we call this method new field code. And this new field code fabricates the markup for a field code, and you'll see here where we add that field code to the last paragraph in the first cell. And this will be added as a non-deleted field code. That's going to then point to the custom XML part with this new field code ID. Once we have that, we can then fabricate the new field code for the custom XML part. We can add that to the custom XML_X document. So now we have put things back into a nice shape where we have a table and a row content item added to that field code, and that's been added as a non-deleted field code to the last paragraph in that first cell, only in this funny special case. If we don't have that case, we then have the first non-deleted paragraph here, and we can get the first field code. We can then just add the table content item to that first field code, to the custom XML that's related to that first field code, and we can remove it from the old custom XML related to the old field code, if that makes sense. So we have two cases here. One case is where we found that we didn't have a place to put the table and row, and another case is where we did have a place to put the table and row. So a fair amount of this code here, if you can imagine, was put together because I put together tests that tried every possible way to screw things up. So in other words, this was a case where I deleted the first row of that table, therefore deleting the table field code and the table content item. And then I went down to the first non-deleted row and I deleted everything in that cell. the first cell, so it didn't have anywhere to put it. So therefore, I had to write code to create a place to put that new filled code and the table content item and the row content item. It's complicated, but there it is. It has to be. And we've covered that particular case. This is enough for this second screencast in this series on the internals of the Identity Manager. In the third and final screencast, I'm going to continue examining the code that handles various editing scenarios.